Should the Penguins be all in is essentially, for this season, is essentially the question.
That's really hard because you want to say, yeah, they should be all in this season because you never know how much longer these guys have left. Truthfully, they're all Crosby, Malkin, Letang, they're all getting older. There's no doubt. Um, we don't know if they're going to be able to put up that kind of season that they just did again next season, let alone the season after. And those three putting up a great season would play a huge role in, uh, moving forward and toward another Stanley Cup. I would say that you have to try and do both. Truthfully, in the grand scheme of things, 23-24, this upcoming season might be their last real chance at it with those three. Can they rebuild following? And by rebuild, I mean retool following this upcoming season with those same three guys, but also different flesh and blood around them. It's going to be a little tougher.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm on the side, I guess, of gunning for it this year.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't know how much time you have left. And
yes,
you don't know what kind of cap space. Sure, the salary cap might go up next off season.
it's supposed to jump very drastically starting next season, but
I won't believe it till I
again,
see it.
supposed to be again. Yes. Yeah.
So utilize your $20 million that you have now properly. Gun for it. Sign a bunch of 1-year deals if you need to. Revamp. Do it again next season. I don't know. We might be looking at the ends of the Crosby, Malkin, Letang tenure the same way we looked at the Brandon Tanev contract. All right, 1 year at a time. Let's see what we can do this year. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's not a totally awful way of looking at it, but that would include gunning for it this year and figuring the rest out down the road.
This is a great question.
It is.
It's one that I don't know. Again, if you're Kyle Dubas, regardless of which approach you take, in my opinion, you operate the same exact way this offseason. Same exact way. If you're going all in for this year, or you're trying to build it to a steady increase towards a real run at it in 2024-25. The real point of divergence for me on those two paths is in season, specifically the trade deadline. How do you evaluate where the team is at once you get to that point? Because I think we can all agree last year's team was the worst Pittsburgh Penguins team we've seen in a long time. And they were still 1 point out of being a playoff team with everything that happened to Chris Letang. I understand he only missed about a quarter of the season with it, but everything that happened with him, everything that happened with your goaltender and how poorly it was mismanaged on the defensive side, which affected the bottom six as well, that team was still only 1 point out of being a playoff team.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the very least, it does not going to take many moves to get them back into being a playoff team, in my opinion.
Right.
But once you get to that trade deadline, you evaluate, am I okay if I'm Kyle Dubas sacrificing future assets to get this team over the hump and get them that extra piece that's going to get them a championship? Am I okay with saying, okay, now this year's first rounder is gone because we need to bring in the big fish at the deadline, or we need to bring in that great middle six piece that was Ivan Barbashev this year for the Vegas Golden Knights? That's when I think there's a real divergence, because I don't think, and as you've seen from Dubas and what he's at least said, he's not going to go out there and swing for home runs every single time this summer. He's looking to take advantage of cap-strapped teams, or help them, as some would say. He's looking to sign smart free agents, but not expensive free agents. And he's looking to figure things out on a very minute scale and try to slowly ease this team back in a positive direction. I think that lends itself to both potentially going for it and going, quote, all in 2023-24, and also building for some stability to get past into 2024-25. But once you get to the trade deadline, that's when, again, at Ohio Pens fan, that's when this really becomes a question. This really becomes a, hey, you've reached the fork in the road. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I will say, because that feels like a cop-out answer to some probably, because I'm saying I won it all, which the Penguins should won it all, and that's what Kyle Dubas is going to try to do. So if I had to pick, if we were at that fork in the road right now, go for it in 2024-25. Because I'm confident Crosby, Malkin, Letang next season and the season after that are going to be good enough. It's going to be a matter of who's around you. If you get to the point where you were this season at the trade deadline and you're at that fork in the road, the team is hanging on by a thread trying to make the playoffs, do not trade away all those future assets at that moment for rental players. Don't overpay for players with term, because guess what? Those prices come down in the summer. And if the team is at that level, no amounts of first round picks are going to get them over the top to going from a team that missed the playoffs and is hanging on by a thread for the playoffs to being a championship team in 2023-24. So if I was at that fork in the road right now, I'm also projecting what could potentially happen in the season. I would say you want to give them the best chance possible in 2024-25 because the cap is going to go up. You're going to have more flexibility next season. I firmly believe that now that the escrow payments have been paid back, or at least almost paid back, the cap is going to go up, I think, at least more than $1 million next year, for Christ's sake. So I would be on the opposite side of you, because I think this team is right now where it is, not a great spot. Didn't make the playoffs. They're 1 point away. I don't think you go all in for 2023, because then I think that not only sacrifices 2024-25, but that sacrifices the gap that we've talked about so much since Kyle Dubas took over 3 weeks ago. So I would say 2024-25 if I had to, but I will tell you this question is better served around the trade deadline. And I think it'd be a great question to revisit once the season is halfway over, once you get closer to the trade deadline, or even 2 months out of the trade deadline when you start to forecast, who could be buyers and who could be sellers.
Yeah, I would go around December even. Yeah, just because December is when we started hooting and hollering that Ron Hextall should have been making trades. It was right there. It was after that Carolina Hurricanes loss. That's when things should have really begun, and they didn't. So I would say around that time, see where we're at. See if we have that season-defining loss and we realize it right away.
Yeah.
And then get back to it again, maybe a month after that. Get back to it again around the deadline, and then that's it. See where we can go. It's a question you can ask a couple of times this season. Hell, it's a question you can ask a couple times this offseason. We have the draft tomorrow. Not that that means much, but who knows what kind of movements you do during that draft.
Oh, yeah. That's also, even if there's no moves made, that's the groundwork for a lot of deals the rest of the summer.
And then you got free agency opening up on Saturday. Then you can ask it again then. You can ask this question a couple times this week.
Yeah.
See how things go.
That's why it's a good question, because it is a utility question that you can ask in multiple different times, because it's intriguing. It's very intriguing.